Hey, everybody. So, we now enter The Limits of Power, Chapter 1, Section 2. So, if you were ever going to watch one of these, I would suggest this one, because we're going to skip a few pages, all right? I know you probably all want to go back and read those other ones, but we can't. There's just no time, all right? So, essentially, what he's going to dive right into here is the Carter administration, all right? And one big thing we need to understand about the 70s is everybody's depressed, right? We have lost Vietnam. We have lost a sense of American exceptionalism. We are entering an economic recession, all right? And gas, well, I know this is starting to sound very familiar, right? But the difference is, unlike now, gas going down significantly, gas is going up massively because in the 1970s, OPEC has, which is of course those oil-producing countries, right, and mainly in the Middle East, have figured out that they can use oil production as an economic weapon against us. All right, and so when that all starts to happen, not only is the price of gas high because of limited availability, there is a point in the 70s where gas isn't available. All right. And so what Carter gets into is something that Americans don't like to hear. All right. And what he gets into is he gives this big speech as president, and he calls it the crisis of confidence speech. All right. And in it, he's essentially saying, hey, everybody, American exceptionalism is over. We are too dependent upon foreign energy sources. And because we are too dependent upon foreign energy sources, we're going to have to change our lifestyle. We're going to have to stop consuming so much, and we're going to have to start getting used to an idea of American middle class awesomeness being not so awesome. Well, as I hope that you can all probably figure out, that is not what Americans want to hear. Americans want to hear that everything's going to be great, because we are not okay with inconvenience. And I think you're going to see a lot of parallels to some of those things in the debates right now as we talk about reopening the nation versus still social distancing versus still keeping things a stay-at-home order. And I think you're going to see a lot of that mirror what is kind of happening politically, right? And that's why Reagan is so popular, because as Carter is saying these things, all right, Reagan will come in and be like, you know what, American exceptionalism isn't over. We're awesome. And Carter, that guy over there running for president again, second term, is trying to say you should do with less. I say more. I say burn more gas. I say buy inefficient trucks. I say build up the military so that we could crush anybody. And that's kind of where, I think you're going to find some hints with this, right? Especially when you start comparing things to like Trump's approval rating isn't really going down. It's actually kind of gotten a little higher than normal because Americans are tired of social distancing, right? And we want to open up because there's that odd moment, right? I mean, take it as you will. There's that odd moment where people are like, well, okay, we did our best, and now we're going to reopen, and some more people might die, but that's what it is, right? And so it's an interesting little, don't be deceived by like how influential an attitude like that is in politics, right? So with that said, we're starting right off with his kind of laying the foundation of what happens with Carter's crisis of confidence speech, and then the incoming consequences of that speech kind of bolstering Reagan to the presidency, all right? And if you, one of you Republicans out there, one of you modern Republicans, Gabe Herway, Connor Michaud, right? You would, this is you love Reagan, right? This is your boy. We've arrived, all right? All right, short shorts. I know you're a Reagan fan. All right, so here we go. Starting on the first complete full paragraph of page 36. As an effort to reorient public policy, Carter's appeal failed completely. Americans showed little enthusiasm for the president's brand of freedom with its connotations of virtuous austerity. Presented with an alternative to more qualitative solutions to the search for more, they declined the offer. Not liking the message, Americans shot the messenger. Given the choice, more still looked better. Highlight this. Carter's crisis of confidence speech did enjoy a long and fruitful life, chiefly as fodder for his political opponents. Stop there. Fodder being essentially like ammunition for them to just attack him, because it's not the best campaign slogan. I mean, Carter, a lot of what Carter has said has actually been proven true in the future. But no one, not the best political campaign to be like, vote for me and you'll have to do with less. Right? It's a terrible slogan, everyone. All right. The most formidable of them, already the frontrunner for the 1980 Republican nomination, was Ronald Reagan, the former governor of California. Reagan portrayed himself as a conservative. He was, in fact, the modern prophet of profligacy, the politician who gave moral sanction to the empire of consumption. Beguiling his fellow citizens with talk of mourning in America, the faux conservative, highlight this, Reagan added to America's civic religion two crucial beliefs. Credit has no limits, and the bills will never come due. Stop there. Balance the books, pay as you go, save for a rainy day. Reagan's abrogation of these ancient bits of folk wisdom did as much to recast America's moral constitution as did sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Reagan offered his preliminary response to Carter on November 13, 1979, the day he officially declared himself a candidate for the presidency. When it came to confidence, I lost my place. The former governor wanted it known that he had lots of it. In a jab at Carter, he alluded to those who would have us believe the United States, like other great civilizations of the past, has reached its zenith of power, and who tell us we must learn to live with less. Reagan rejected these propositions. He envisioned a future in which the United States would gain even greater power, while Americans would enjoy ever greater prosperity, the one reinforcing the other. The sole obstacle to all this was the federal government, which he characterized as inept, arrogant, and confiscatory. His proposed solution was to pare down the bureaucracy, reduce federal spending, and cut taxes. Remember that bureaucracy is all the non-elected offices, employees of government. Every time you have to fill out a paper, a form, every time you have to ask permission to do something, every time you have to have, that's all bureaucracy, right? Every time you got to fill out one of those freaking field trip medical forms, that's bureaucracy, right? If there was an energy crisis to that too, he made clear, was the government's fault. On one point, at least, Reagan agreed with Carter. The only way to free ourselves from the monopoly pricing power of OPEC is to be less dependent on the outside sources of fuel. Yet Reagan had no interest in promoting energy independence through the reduced consumption. The answer, obvious to anyone except those in the administration, it seems, is more domestic production of oil and gas. When it came to energy, he was insistent, we must decide that less is not enough. History remembers Reagan as a fervent Cold Warrior. Yet, in announcing his candidacy, he devoted remarkably little attention to the Soviet Union. Referring to the Kremlin, his language measured, not belligerent. He did not denounce the Soviets for being evil. He made no allusions to rolling back communism. He will, all right? But not when he was first running, all right? He offered no tribute to the American soldiers standing guard on freedom's frontiers. He said nothing about the urgent need to rebuild America's defenses. Highlight this. In outlining his views on foreign policy, he focused primarily on his vision of a North American Accord, an economic union linking the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Stop there. This will become known as NAFTA. It is time we stop thinking about our nearest neighbors as foreigners, he declared. As was so often the case, Reagan laid on enough frosting to compensate for any shortcomings in the cake. In his peroration, he approvingly quoted Thomas Paine, on Americans having the power to begin the world over again. He endorsed John Winthrop's charge that God had commanded Americans to erect a city upon a hill, and he cited, without attribution, Franklin D. Roosevelt's entreaty for the present generation of Americans to keep their rendezvous with destiny. For Reagan, the arc of America's future, like the arc of American past, at least as he remembered it, pointed ever upward. Overall, it was a bravado performance. And it worked. No doubt Reagan spoke from the heart, but his real gift was his canny knack for telling Americans what most of them wanted to hear. As a candidate for the White House, Reagan did not call on Americans to tighten their belts, make do, settle for less. He saw no need for sacrifice or self-denial. He rejected as false Carter's dichotomy between quantity and quality. Above all, he assured his countrymen that they could have more. Throughout his campaign, this remark remained a key theme. Highlight this. The contest itself took place against the backdrop of the ongoing hostage crisis, the Iranian hostage crisis, movie Argo with Ben Affleck, if you've ever seen that. If not, check it out. Very good. The contest itself, keep highlighting, took place against the backdrop of the ongoing hostage crisis that saw several dozen American diplomats and soldiers held prisoner in Iran. Here was the unmistakable evidence of what happened when the United States hesitated to assert itself in this part of the world. Stop there, aka the Middle East. The lesson seemed clear. If developments in the Persian Gulf could adversely affect the American standard of living, then control of that region by anyone other than the United States had become intolerable. Carter himself was the first to make this point when he enunciated that the Carter Doctrine in January 1980, vowing to use any means necessary, including military force, to prevent hostile power from dominating the region. And so, as you can see, the skill of Reagan is telling the American people what they want to hear, right? I would argue that Trump is trying to do this with the whole reopening, at least to his voter base, but he's just not quite as adept at it, all right? Like Reagan, codename the Great Communicator, right? You know what I mean? Like, he tells you what you want to hear, and you're like, yes, yes. There's a yes right there. All right, so Carter's 11th hour pugnacity came too late to save his presidency. The election of 1980 reaffirmed his continuing American preference for quantitative solutions. Despite the advantages of incumbency, Carter suffered a crushing defeat. Reagan carried all but 4 states and won the popular vote by well over 8 million. It was a landslide and important. On January 20th, 1981, Ronald Reagan became president. His inaugural address served as an occasion to recite various conservative bromides. Reagan made a show of decrying the profligacy of the recent past. For decades, we have piled deficit upon deficit, mortgaging our future and our children's future for the temporary convenience of the present. To continue this long trend is to guarantee tremendous social, cultural, political, and economic upheaval. He vowed to put America's economic house in order. You and I, as individuals, can, by borrowing, live beyond our means, but only for a limited period of time. Why, then, should we think that collectively as a nation, we're not bound by that same limitation? Highlight this. Reagan reiterated an oft-made promise to check and reverse growth of government. Stop there. So highlight Reagan reiterated to government. He would do none of these things. In each case, in fact, he did just the reverse. During the Carter years, the federal deficit was averaged at $54.5 billion annually. During the Reagan era, deficits skyrocketed, averaging to $210.6 billion over the course of Reagan's 2 terms in office. Overall, federal spending nearly doubled from $590.9 billion in 1980 to $1.14 trillion in 1989. The federal government did not shrink; it grew, the bureaucracy swelling by nearly 5%, while Reagan occupied the White House. Although his supporters had promised that he would shut down extraneous government programs and agencies, that turned out to be just so much hot air. To call Reagan a phony or a hypocrite is to miss the point. The Reagan Revolution, over which he presided, was never about fiscal responsibility or small government. The object of exercise was to give the American people what they wanted, that being the essential precondition for winning re-election in 1984 and consolidating Republican control in Washington. Highlight this. Far more accurately than Jimmy Carter, Reagan understood what made Americans tick. They wanted self-gratification, not self-denial. Stop there. That's pretty much been the American way since day one, right? It's like we said, we didn't fight the revolution to change a way of life. We fought the American Revolution to maintain a way of life that existed, right? Reagan's 2 terms in office became an era of gaudy propriety and excess. Tax cuts and the largest increase to date in peacetime military spending formed the twin centerpieces of Reagan's economic policy. The former justified by theories of supply-side economics, just another version of trickle-down economics with Hoover, right? Money to the business grows, they create more jobs, more money with paychecks, and the success trickles down, right? The latter by perceived imperative of responding to a Soviet arms buildup and a Soviet adventurism. Declaring that defense is not a budget item, Reagan served the connection between military spending and all other fiscal or political considerations, a proposition revived by George W. Bush after September 2001. None of this is to suggest that claims of Reagan Revolution were fraudulent. There was a revolution. It just had little to do with the advertised tenets of conservatism. The true nature of the revolution becomes apparent only in retrospect. Reagan unveiled it in remarks that he made on March 23, 1983, in a speech in which the president definitively spelled out his alternative to Carter's road not taken. History remembers this as the occasion when the president announced his Strategic Defense Initiative, a futuristic, impermeable anti-missile shield intended to make nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete. Critics derisively dubbed his proposal Star Wars, a label the president in the end embraced, because what was super popular in the early 80s that had just come out? Star Wars. Like they're trying to beat him down. It's like when the Republicans, all right, called the Affordable Care Act Obamacare, thinking that it was going to be like something to take it down, and it became more like you gave him the campaign he wanted. Like, oh my god, like, who wouldn't want to have weapons in space like Star Wars, if that's what the man, like, and you just labeled it that, and everybody be like, that'd be awesome, where's my Millennium Falcon? Like, the sheer, anyway, sometimes people don't think before they get into politics, all right? And so the whole point of the Sdi Defense, because we've talked about this, what makes nuclear weapons prevent war is the idea that we will all die, no matter who wins. The winners lose, right? It only takes one nuclear bomb drop to ruin your day, all right? And so an SDI defense is this idea that we could make a first strike, and then if they shoot back at us, we shoot their missiles down before they hit us, thus making, even though like global effects would get us, is this idea that we would be able to make first strikes whenever we want, right? Okay, it's a terrible idea, by the way. Nuclear weapons prevent war. We've talked about this. Anyway, all right. If you will, pardon my stealing a film line, the Force is with us. Get it? Star Wars. Yet embedded in Reagan's remarks were two decidedly radical propositions. First, that the minimum requirement of U.S. security now required the United States to achieve status akin to invulnerability. The second, that modern technology was bringing this seemingly utopian goal within reach. Star Wars, in short, introduced into the mainstream politics the proposition that Americans could be truly safe only if the United States enjoyed something akin to permanent global military supremacy. Here was Reagan's preferred response to the crisis that Jimmy Carter had identified in July of 1979. Highlight this. Here, too, can be found the strategic underpinning of George W. Bush's post-9/11 global war on terror. SDI prefigured the Great War on Terror. That's what GWOT means. It's not Game of Thrones stuff. It means Global War on Terror. Both resting on the assumption that military power offered an antidote to the uncertainties and anxieties of living in a world not run entirely in accordance with American preference. Stop there. Whereas Carter had summoned Americans to mend their ways, which implied a need for critical self-awareness, President Reagan obviated any need for soul-searching by simply inviting his fellow citizens to carry on. For Carter, ending American dependence on foreign oil meant promoting moral renewal at home. Reagan and Reagan's successors mimicked Carter in bemoaning the nation's growing energy dependence. In practice, however, they did next to nothing to curtail that dependence. Instead, they wielded U.S. military power to ensure access to oil, hoping thereby to prolong the empire's consumption lease on life. Carter had portrayed quantity, the American preoccupation with what had been called piling up of material goods, as fundamentally at odds with quality, authentic freedom, as he defined it. Reagan reconciled what was, to Carter, increasingly irreconcilable. In Reagan's view, quality, advanced technology converted to military use by talented, highly skilled soldiers, could sustain quantity, a consumer economy based on the availability of cheap credit and cheap oil. And so what he's saying is we're not going to worry, we're too dependent on foreign oil. We're not going to have our own oil source. We're going to make our military so strong that we just take it when we want it. Right? With that said, ends part 1 of chapter 1, section 2, and I will just be right back, and we will continue and do part 2 of chapter 1, section 2. All right? See you in a bit.